charm is related to the ancient word carmen, which had to do with the words that expressed and evoked magic. Charisma also comes from that same root, which is this idea that you yourself personally can have magical powers. And that's applying the power of words to your own ethos.
All right, let's kick off today's show. Today we're talking with Jay Heinrichs, a world expert on rhetoric and persuasion, on how to use the tools of the ancient Greeks on ourselves to achieve our goals. Jay is the author of Thank You for Arguing, What Aristotle, Lincoln, and Homer Simpson Can Teach Us About the Art of Persuasion, and his latest book, Aristotle's Guide to Self-Persuasion, How Ancient Rhetoric, Taylor Swift, and Your Own Soul Can Help You Change Your Life, is out. And he's excited today to join us to share how ancient rhetoric tools transform self-doubt into confidence, why suffering builds identity through strategic mental reframing, how Taylor Swift uses self-persuasion for her own peak performance, and when chaos becomes opportunity through deliberate timing of decisions. Welcome to the show, Jay. Great to have you. So, love to hear about your journey into self-persuasion.
Well, I wrote this book. My wife told me to. She's really smart. I do everything she says. But for years, I had been writing books on how to persuade other people, which is your wheelhouse. So one of them became a New York Times bestseller. I was feeling really proud of myself, and yet getting more and more miserable by the year. When you look at me, you can tell I'm really old. I'm turning 70 this summer, and turning into everything that a 70-year-old man turns into. Lots of self-pity. Hey, kids, get off my lawn kind of nonsense. And my wife, out of desperation, probably said, have you ever considered applying all these tools that you've been using as a consultant with corporations, government agencies, nonprofits on yourself? And I said, no, because persuasion, as you know, needs an audience. So, and plus, the art of rhetoric, which is the original ancient art of persuasion, depends on the people not knowing they're being manipulated. I mean, great rhetoric disguises itself. And so I said, that's not going to work if I'm trying to, manipulate myself into manipulating myself. And she said, well, maybe you need to go back to what you read before and try again. And so I did. I did deep dive into Aristotle and discovered that he has this, like his weirdest book, which is saying a lot, is called On the Soul. And what he's saying is that the soul isn't entirely you. There's your daily self that, eats donuts and feels sorry for itself and has all the bad habits. And then there's your soul, which is your best self. It's what you wish you saw in the mirror. It was like the ideal Boy Scout. And so I realized that that's what I should be trying to persuade, my soul. And I know this gets kind of weird, but the way he describes it is it's actually kind of an organ in your body. In fact, a great philosopher later on claimed he had found it, which is right. Your soul is in your pituitary gland. Now you know. But I just decided I would, take this ideal self and try to prove to it that I was worthy of it. And that led to everything I was able to do, applying these tools of rhetoric, the art of persuasion, on myself. And hey, by the way, you guys are the art of charm. And I have a whole chapter on charms in my book, in part because Aristotle started writing this, but even before that, these ancient manipulators called the sophists came up with this idea that charms actually activate this kind of magic in people's heads. And one of them, a guy I dearly love named Gorgias, that was his name, Gorgias. He made so much money manipulating people and giving speeches that he literally had a gold statue made of himself. How great is that? And he claimed that the woman, Helen of Troy, who launched those 1,000 ships, actually was manipulated by rhetoric, which acted like a drug on her system and caused an entire war. So, I mean, you need this stuff for yourself. The charms are all about manipulating people through the magic of words, which is what you guys are all about.
I would agree in part. I think what's really interesting, though, is this idea of actually looking at yourself. What was that moment for you that you recognized, I have to persuade myself? Can you take us back to exactly that?
There was a moment, and now, if you don't think I was nerdy before, wait till you hear this. So one of the ways I like to procrastinate, like any good professional writer, is to look up words in the Oxford English Dictionary. And I actually was wondering when I was supposed to be doing my work, whether the hyperbole, the trope of exaggeration really was a trope. And I'm not going to explain tropes because you don't need to know. But so I looked it up in the OED and discovered that hyperbole, do you know this, comes from two Greek words, hyper, which means above or beyond, and bole, it's where we get the word ball from. So it literally means to throw beyond. And I was thinking, that's it. I will correct my life by coming up with some ridiculous hyperbole where I, like a dog playing fetch, only I'm also throwing and being the dog. And so at the time, I was suffering from a really serious hip ailment called snapping hip syndrome. And I'm about to have lunch, so I'm not even going to explain it to you because it would make me sick. But doctors had told me that I may not be able to walk normally ever again, and I might end up in a wheelchair. So I ended up going to some doctor who gave me more than 300 shots to kind of flood the zone of my nervous system. And it actually helped. But it also meant I had to do this ridiculous, painful PT every single day. Well, most people don't do PT for a really good reason. It sucks. So I thought in order to get myself to do this, I would give myself a hyperbole. I wouldn't just be able to walk. I would trail run the way I used to in my youth. And not only trail run, but there's this mountain in New Hampshire where Olympians prove their oxygenation, their VO2. And they do that by running to the top of this mountain. It's very steep. It's horrible. 3.7 miles with 2,800 feet of elevation gain. And I thought, I will become the first person at over 50 to run his age up this mountain, which means run it in fewer minutes to the top than I'm old in years. And only a dozen people had ever been recorded to do that. All of them were well under 50, as you might imagine. Two physiologists had told me it was probably impossible. So I thought, that's my hyperbole. It's stupid. It's pointless. It's extremely painful. It will ruin my income because I'm going to have to train for this 4 to 6 hours a day. And I thought, what a glorious thing to fail at, because I'll still end up better than what I had tried to do. Plus, if I managed to run it in fewer minutes than I was old in years, I would get younger, because that's a much better measure than simply what year I was born in. And so I spent an entire year experimenting on myself with the art of persuasion to persuade myself that A, this was worth it, B, it was possible, and C, I was an amazing athlete, which, by the way, I'm not. Well, I actually am. I've convinced myself that I am.
Let's talk about that amazing athlete piece, because it really gets to one of the cores of the book, is this sense of identity. And even now you jokingly say, well, I'm not. But in order to really harness that ability, you have to believe in that identity of being an athlete. So take us through how you were actually persuading yourself into that belief to train every day.
Well, I have to go back to Aristotle. I'm sorry, but it's necessary. So Aristotle described the ideal character, or brand, as we'd say today. Your image or your self-image comes down to three characteristics. And I've translated them from the Greek as craft, caring, and cause. And this, by the way, if you aren't trying to convince other people that you're a leader or that you're someone worth trusting and following, these things really do apply. But they can apply to your convincing your soul that you're worthy. Craft has to do with your ability to solve a particular problem, or that you know what you're doing, and that you're a capable person. Okay, so that's craft. Caring has to do, and this gets weird when you're talking about yourself. caring has to do with true friendship, or philos, as they say in Greek, which has to do with your audience's belief that you'll do anything for them. You're not in it for yourself. You're in it just for them. Here I am. I'm in it for me, but not really. I'm in it for my soul. And then finally, most important of all is cause, which has to do with a certain number of values that everybody shares, that your audience shares, and that you live up to them. Like, what's this really about? What's the big cause? So I had to convince my soul that I was capable of training, that I really knew how to do this. And that required me doing, getting in touch with physiologists, interviewing a ton of people, talking to workout experts and all this, not to mention my doctor, who is a badass and totally got it. Caring had to do with my convincing myself that this was the best thing for me, and I was going to sacrifice my income and everything else in order to get myself out of my own head and get my body where I wanted it to be. But what was the cause? I decided that I would prove myself to be a spiritually worthy person by sharing this with others. Someday I was going to write a book, and that was my cause. So those are the three aspects of the ideal character. And by the way, if you can convince a future employer or a future spouse, for that matter, those are the three characteristics that will win for you.
I imagine in this, there's a lot of self-doubt. I mean, we're talking about hyperbole of a goal coming out of a very serious ailment that required 300 shots. So talk us through those wrestling with those moments of self-doubt.
Well, I could start with the shots. They were like, so what they were that was sugar water. They were just dextrose. They didn't contain any kind of medicine at all. The idea was deliberately to cause pain, to flood my nerves so that my gluteal muscles would stop firing. There was in this vicious loop I was in. Like, my hips hurt, and that caused my glutes to tighten, which caused the iliotibial band. I said I wasn't going to say this. To catch on my hip bones on both sides, which brought me right to the floor. I mean, you literally can't walk when you're in that condition, and it causes your muscles to tighten even more. He had this experimental treatment where, with hundreds of shots, he would give you the equivalent of a wasp sting over and over and over again. And by the way, this was the first session with 300 shots. And then this lasted for weeks with fewer and fewer shots. It actually worked. But while I was going through it, I mean, I would have told the doctor anything to get him to stop. Torture, it turns out, really works.
Yeah.
But what I ended up doing was reframing this to myself. So this is a really powerful tool of rhetoric, or the art of persuasion, is how you define an issue, what the terms really are. What's this really about? And I thought, this isn't torture. This is suffering. And one thing that Aristotle teaches is that suffering is a skill. So suffering isn't just something you go through. It's something you think of while you're going through it. And your ability to withstand pain or effort is the art of suffering. It's an actual skill. And I thought, okay, I'm really good at suffering, or at least I'm getting good as these shots continue. And I sweat onto this cut. I mean, it was horrible. Anyway, and I thought, this isn't just medical treatment. This is training. This is the beginning of my training. So that was sort of a second reframe I did. And by repeating it over and over to myself, that this was, suffering and it's a part of training, and I'm proving that I'm really good at this, I'll be able to run up a mountain, which, by the way, is just as painful. That I will get better at doing this and someday run my age. And it worked. That reframing was one of the most powerful tools I used.
We've discussed on the show many times about reframing and the power that it has, and certainly I love hearing that somebody is now understanding and teaching the power of rhetoric, because another thing that we've discussed on the show is the importance of words and their definition. and the emotional effect that words have on you. That's what puts you under the spell. That spell is that your emotions are now carrying you, the pathos without the logos, or at least you're under that emotional spell. And the other thing about it, which is in your reframing of that suffering is about transformation. Anytime that you suffer, you are not going to be the same person on the other side. You are killing a part of yourself, and that is the price for what is about to happen. So even in learning a skill, there's the valley of despair where you're hating everything because you're being clumsy with it. Upon learning these skills that we teach here, you just don't listen to this podcast and now you're instantly charming. There are things that you have to do, the implementation of these things, and they're clunky. It's awkward, but then all of a sudden you start to get the hang of it. It starts to be comfortable. And guess what? Now you're a charming person. But there was something that you had to give up to become this new version of yourself. And I myself, I've been obsessed with philosophy. In fact, getting into psychology and beginning the art of charm with AJ started me 20 years ago on my philosophical journey, and it's it's it it's the best tool that you can have to frame your existence and path through life.
Oh, from your lips to God's ears, John. The what we're talking about is logos and pathos combined. That makes for ethos, as you know. That's your identity. It's your self-identity, but it's also what you project to others. All this comes down to rhetoric, and rhetoric is about the power of words. That's that's what the art is all about. And that power, by the way, to get word nerdy again, charm is related to the ancient word carmen, which had to do with the words that expressed and evoked magic. But charisma also comes from that same root, which is this idea that you yourself personally can have magical powers. And that's applying the power of words to your own ethos. And so, I mean, what you're saying is so well aligned with what Aristotle and Cicero and all those great ancients believed.
Well, for us, in what we train our clients on and allow them to recognize, and especially with many of our clients being male, is the power of emotions woven into the words that you are using. Being able to recognize the emotions in others and being able to convey the right emotions at the right time is so important to standing out as charming and having that charisma.
So that's such a great point. And I can tell you, I'm speaking to you from a cabin my wife built with a 22-year-old timber framer on 150 acres in a town of 278 people. This is an introvert's dream that I'm living right now. And I'm an off the charts introvert. And yet what rhetoric allows me to do is to fake being an extrovert really well, in part by reading people with certain kinds of tools of rhetoric that allow me to read an audience with the thought that I'm going to try to move them a little bit. So this idea of not only attaching emotions to your own words, but what you're saying is you're able to read the emotions through the words of others. That's so rhetorical.
And recognizing in order to move people, you have to believe that you can move yourself. Like there's a self-belief that goes along with what we're talking about here to have that charm, that ability to move others. If they're listening to you and they don't believe that you can even move, that you can even do what you're saying, then they're certainly not going to move on your behalf.
The first time I ever employed rhetoric, years before I learned what rhetoric was, I was a fairly unpopular ninth grader. And I thought there's one way I could get girls and maybe boys to like me more, was to pretend I was popular. And so I decided that when I walked into any classroom I would be smiling, kind of chuckling as if someone had just told me something, a great joke. And I doubt that it influenced a single girl to like me, but it worked on me. I mean, I actually thought that I was more popular. And so from that day, now if I do a presentation, or I'm trying to win business for a client, or I'm selling to a client, uh, I will walk in pretending as if someone had just told me something great. So from ninth grade to today, I'm using the same rhetorical principle. And what does that do? It's not convincing others. It's not. If anything, I probably look stupid. As John said, this is awkward, and it's hard to do. But it totally works on yourself if you do it.
I would argue it does work on others because we all chase those upbeat emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about the great orators, they have that ability to evoke that emotion in you while you're listening to them, to believe that you can achieve that. And what the course that they're setting out is worthy of that achievement. And oftentimes when that self-doubt hits us, we lose that upbeat emotion. And then that flows through our words, that flows through our delivery. And of course, the audience is nowhere near moved without that upbeat emotion.
There is another way to increase your sense of confidence when you're speaking to others, or even when you're alone. And that's repeating certain things. And so this is, that people come up with affirmations to say to themselves. But actually, the ancients came up with a figure of speech called the paean, Paen, which is a combination of short and long syllables, very rhythmic. And so one of my favorite songs is actually a paean. Hit the road, Jack. Don't you come back no mo. And that's, if you repeat that often enough, it will actually affect things in your brain. And there's actually neuroscience that has confirmed this. So if you can come up with rhythmic expressions, you'll do as well as Madison Avenue, which, by the way, is paeans all over the place. Bet you can't. Eat Just One sold billions of dollars of potato chips. That's a paean. If you can do that to yourself, what you're doing, if you repeat it often enough, you're evoking the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that interprets reality. So you actually change the reality in your head if you repeat something often enough. And this neuroscience absolutely confirms this. But the ancients came up with it in the first place. Give them all credit.
I want to point this out as well. This is something that now with the internet, people are starting to realize, and it's the same thing. So we're talking about jingles that stick in our head that change the way we think. We're talking about poems, where that rhythmic cycle. But there has now been a science of studying even newscasts from across the country. And you can see that there are certain things that are replicated to exact science in order to persuade and to change thinking on subjects. This is well versed, well documented, and you can see it happening. This is an as you mentioned, the ancients had this figured out. And if that was figured out back then, of course it is widely used today. We have modern music being centrally written out of Sweden for many, many artists. Yes, these are, and of course, if you are in charge of mass populations, you need to be able to connect to them. You need to be able to talk to them. And the best way of doing that is through the primal rhythms that all of us have, all of us are susceptible to. And again, that comes back to charisma, charm, being enchanted. What do these words mean? Well, again, it is your pathos being controlled.
Well, it worked for Taylor Swift.
Yeah, break that down for us because we were laughing that Taylor Swift made the cover of the book.
First of all, I have to redrop her name now because so I spent my career in magazines for a quarter century before I started writing, quit my last legitimate job and started writing books. And I am the first magazine editor ever to put Taylor on the cover of a magazine. And when I tell that to any 16-year-old girl, I'm God temporarily until they realize I don't actually know Taylor Swift. But so the cool thing about Taylor Swift, I mean, this is a woman. Heads of state of other governments are begging to have her come give concerts so she can personally boost their economies. That's power. And so she's done a number of things that have that prove how well she's able, first of all, to discipline herself. And so one of the things I write about when I'm talking about suffering is, do you know when she prepared for Eras tour? I mean, this is famous. I'm not revealing a secret here, but she sings 44 songs? She sang 44 songs in this tour. To prepare for that, she ran on a treadmill while singing all 44 songs. And that launched this whole kind of meme of endurance athletes singing badly in front of video cameras and posting them online, where they actually attempt to do this entire 3 hours of 44 songs while running. Very few of them succeeded. So right away, her discipline in being able to prepare for this sort of thing. The other thing that you have to see, though, and you're talking about the power of words to change your emotions about yourself, which is, your self-identity or your ethos. That's what her songs are about. It shows this path that she takes from this girl who's, heartbroken all the time to the powerful woman she is today. I'm a Swiftie and I'm proud of it.
So for those in our audience who are skeptical of this concept of self-persuasion, where's the fine line between persuasion and deception?
I like to call it manipulation. So when you manipulate a tool, you're hoping. When I manipulate a tool, I hurt everything. But usually, if you're using a tool well, you're not hurting what you're using the tool for. So the thing about rhetoric, the art of persuasion, is it's a dark art. It can be used for very bad things. I don't have to tell you this. So you have to have a good ethical sense. You have to do it for good, or at least convince yourself that that's what you're doing. When you're manipulating yourself, you have to manipulate yourself wisely. And my book kind of talks about that, how to do that. So but when I say manipulation, I often get flamed by people with a strong ethical sense, understandably. But if the important thing is, when you manipulate somebody, you want to make sure they're not going to regret it next morning. So that's your job. The tools are there, but they're morally neutral. It's up to you to determine whether you're using them well. But it is manipulation. And I think we're fooling ourselves if we think there's a good art of persuasion and there's a bad art of persuasion. Persuasion is just how you use the tools.
So when we aim these tools at ourselves, how can we use them in a way that isn't deception?
Part of this has to do with figuring out what your soul really is. At your Aristotelian soul. We're not talking about your Christian soul or your Islamic soul or, your Jewish soul. It's Aristotle's soul is very different. For one thing, it dies when you do. So you got to skip all the major religions when you're talking about the Aristotelian soul. Getting to know your soul, one of the easiest ways to do that is to separate what Aristotle calls your needs from your appetites. I call them your wants. So, what you want and what you need are two very different things. So a great exercise to do is to plan a vacation. Super fun to do. You're not suffering when you do that. But what kind of vacation are you planning? Is it one with the kind of bucket list everybody else has? And I mentioned in the book, if you go to the Louvre in the room with the Mona Lisa, you see a bunch of people literally jumping up and down and holding their phones as high as they can. They're checking off a bucket list. And Aristotle would say, that's a no-no. You are violating your soul's best standards because you're showing off to other people. That's your want. That's not your true need. So think about a place you would go that maybe no one else would go. And separating the one from the other is a way to discover what your soul is. Now, once you and there are other ways to do that as well. But once you realize what your truest self is and what your best self is, then trying to live up to that best self while trying to convince it that you're as good as it is, that's a form of manipulation that can work internally, can make you feel better about yourself. Now, you're going to screw up, obviously. So you need to reframe those screw ups. One way to do that, and by the way, I'm a master at screwing up. And I actually have corporate clients who call me when there's a major screw up. And what you do is make sure you tell the truth before anybody else. You need to do that to yourself when you're screwing up to yourself, to your soul. But the next thing you do is to talk about how this violated your otherwise high standards temporarily. And then thirdly, you switch the tense to the future, which is what Aristotle called deliberative rhetoric, where you make choices to affect the future. And basically, you're going to say, here's how I'm going to keep this from happening again. Now, you can do that to yourself, and you're manipulating your soul, but you're doing it in all the right ways. Can I tell you a story about my son, who would be my best soul if I were a lot younger? When he was 15 years old, I was standing alone in my bathroom, wearing nothing but a towel, first thing in the morning. And I found that the toothpaste had all been used up. And being the father of a 15-year-old son, I knew who the likely culprit was. So I shout through this closed door, "George, he used up all the toothpaste." And I hear this sarcastic voice on the other side saying, "That's not the point, is it, Dad? The point is, how are we going to keep this from happening again?" Now, he had heard me lecture at the dinner table for years without any evidence that he was paying attention, that the best way to get out of trouble is to change the tense to the future. Because as Aristotle said, the past tense is about forensics, crime and punishment, like where the screw up was, or mistakes in the past, or actual crimes. The present tense has to do with values, good and bad, who's good and who's bad. So it's very tribal rhetoric often when you're saying what people are and who the good people are and the bad people. Aristotle's favorite rhetoric was deliberative rhetoric, where you deliberate about the choices you're going to make to solve problems for all time. And that's what George was making fun of me for. But he's actually doing it, which was he was changing the tense, like admitting his guilt, but saying he's reframing this from the crime that was committed to an interesting solution to this toothpaste problem. And of course, we solved that problem by asking him please to go down to the basement and get me another tube, which, thinking he had won the argument, he happily did. Win-win. Both of us manipulating each other, by the way.
It strikes me that in order for this self-persuasion to work, your identity really has to be on the line, like your true identity. You can't just throw the ball, hyperbole, around things that really don't move that truest sense of self.
Right. So, I mean, I think you constantly have to go back and think about what your soul wants. And also, I mean, here's the thing. If you feel guilty about something you did because of a certain set of values but you believe in, that often doesn't work very well, because guilt is a kind of pain. If you're thinking about your soul as someone who's with you all the time, that sort of changes the picture a little bit, because it changes your emotion from guilt to shame. And shame is a much more temporary emotion. It's how you feel embarrassed in front of an audience. And that can work so much better than thinking, suppose you want to lose weight and you're looking at a donut on the one hand and an apple on the other, and you're thinking, I want the donut. Of course you do. But then you think, I'll feel guilty because next day I may feel sorry that I ate this donut because, there goes my diet. On the other hand, if I eat the apple, I'm not going to like doing that right now. But in the long term, that's guilt. If you say to your soul, hey, soul, which should I eat? Obviously, your Aristotelian soul is going to say, go now for the apple. You'll feel better instantly. You're going to feel embarrassed about yourself if you eat that donut. that's an immediate emotion, which is much more powerful, as you know, than something that is going to affect you in the future.
For many in our audience, they get hung up on the achievement piece and not do the deeper introspection around identity. And what strikes me about your goal was, yes, there's only a handful of people who've run this time shorter than their age. But then you said something really striking. I would also get younger in achieving this. And that sense of getting younger, increasing your VO2 max, allows you longevity to spend more time with your son, to be there for your family, which gets to a much deeper part of you than comparing yourself to the 12 other people who've ran this mountain. But so many in our audience really get tied to the achievement of like, oh, how I'm competing against people or checking this off my box of getting a better time. And they're not as tied as closely to their true sense of self and that identity that they're really after.
Every great athlete will tell you, I'm competing against myself. And they're talking about their Aristotelian soul when they do that. Now, here's the thing. I never believed I was going to run my age, despite all the tools of manipulation. The odds were against me. Scientists were telling me it was impossible. So come on, who am I against a scientist? Even my soul can't win out there. But I also knew that if I failed, I was going to fail up. And that was how I reframed things. And you know, failure, or your acceptance of failure in all the right ways, how you interpret it and learn from it, reframe it, that's a form of suffering. That's bearing the pain of failure. So I planned to fail. I'm not going to tell you whether I actually ran my age. I will hint strongly that I'm younger than you think I am. But you have to read the book. It's a total mystery up until the end.
Take us to that moment, though, of actually lacing the shoes on the day that this is finally happening, because there's a lot of rehab and a lot of work and training that goes into it, and self-doubt that you've overcome to show up every day to do the suffering. But then there's the actual moment of like, okay, now this is happening. Like, this is reality, where I think a lot of times when we get caught up in the training and the process, we don't actually think about game time.
I deliberately, in order to make this experiment as interesting as possible, schedule this for one try. I either would succeed or fail. And I did it on my birthday, in part because that would gain me an extra minute on the mountain. So I was turning 58, and I thought, you know, I was 57, but that I'd have to beat that. So 58 gave me an extra minute. I also had gone on Facebook and created a page called Breaking the Time Barrier. And I got 4,000 followers, and I was telling them I was going to try to do this. So I was deliberately increasing the pressure on myself to make it more difficult. So that these tools of persuasion could, you know, I could decide whether they'd really work or not by making the experiment harder. On that day, when I got up, I had reframed every part of the mountain, which, and I won't describe them, but I had assigned individual words for each one. Relax, flow, focus, and dance. The dance part, by the way, was near the top, where torrential rains and weird geology had turned these rocks into like razors. And I was wearing shoes that were like slippers, you know, barefoot running, as they call it. And so in order to like get across this, which by the way, you have to do as fast as possible. It's not as steep, so you need to be really fast. While like mincing across these razor rocks, I reframe that as dancing. So stupid and silly, but repeated often enough that I really believed I was dancing. So at the very beginning, as I'm standing there, I had friends with me. My run began at 6 a.m. So these poor souls had to drive an hour with me. One of them was 13 years old, the poor thing, looking miserable. Now, the conditions were also terrible. It was way too warm. And so you burn enough calories on this run to do the equivalent of converting a liter of water from ice to boiling. And so your ability to handle that heat, which is harder and harder as you get older, was a real factor. Plus it was humid, which makes your sweat not work. all of that together made me think there's no way this is going to succeed. And yet, all this work I had done, I thought, I am in my moment. I am doing what I'm meant to do. And this was my soul talking to me. I'd been talking to it often enough that I was hearing it back. And I was ready. I was ready. I mean, I hit my watch and started running. And by the way, it's a terrifying thing. The Abenaki Indians, who were the first humans to occupy this place that we know of, said that there was an angry god who squatted at the top. And so they never climbed it. They had the good sense not to try. On a day like that, you kind of feel like that God is like ready to stop me. And yet I had all this stuff to convince myself that I was this great athlete. And that's what kept me going all the way to the top.
What is really interesting to me about this concept and how important it is, we've talked on the show in the past about the victim mindset and how often it robs us of our potential. And what we're talking here around self-persuasion is really moving from the victim to the protagonist and how important that is in your life to achieving the things that actually matter to you.
I'm going to steal that. That is perfectly said. I like to say in terms of rhetoric gives you agency, right? It allows you to gain control over an audience or over yourself. And that does get you away from victimhood. And before I started this whole experiment and discovered what hyperbole was, this throwing beyond myself, I was feeling like a victim, which, come on. I mean, I'm a privileged old white guy. I'm the last victim in the world. And yet I was feeling terrible self-pity and needed to get that out of my head. And by taking control of the conversation I was having with my soul and allowing my soul to answer back, that made all the difference in the world. Yet using these tools I was using for corporations. I mean, I wasn't on some spiritual journey, manipulating myself through these tools.
Let's talk kairos. I know it's one of those concepts in the book that's so fun. And I think for our audience to really look for ways in their life to incorporate it now that we recognize the power of self-persuasion.
Kairos is, we should all be talking about kairos, especially in the business world, because kairos is the art of opportunity and of timing. So one of the things I did that was one of the less enjoyable ways I used the art of timing was I realized I didn't have enough time in the day to do everything I wanted to do. I mean, I still had clients. I still had to work for a living. And so I thought I needed to invent my own time zone. That is as kairotic, as we say in rhetoric, as possible, like using the art of timing. And so I waited until the fall when daylight saving time turns into standard time. You gain an hour, right? But what I did was I set my alarm back so that I actually was getting up 4:30 in the morning instead of, I had gradually gotten used to getting up at 5:30. This time it felt the same. Getting up at 4:30 was the same as 5:30. And I did it to start working out. At 4:30 in the morning, I was working out. Now, in order to write the book, I had to convince myself I was doing a total writer's block. And I turned, oh, by the way, that time zone, and you can use this for yourself if you can come up with a clever name for your own time zone. I call it J-light saving because I'm Jay Heinrichs. Yeah, I mean, which I thought was the wittiest thing I'd ever done in my life. And it here's the other thing about besides kairos, if you can make yourself smile, you're employing what modern behaviorists call cognitive ease, which makes you more persuadable. So people who are smiling, if you can get your audience to smile, and not trying to tell jokes necessarily, they don't always land, but getting them just to smile, they're more likely to be persuaded. And so just naming my time zone J-light savings made me think it was a great time zone, even though I was getting up at a ridiculously early hour in the morning. And the hard part is nobody else is in that time zone. So I'm really boring in the evening. Still, this all worked for me. Now, kairos does more than that. Kairos is a way that allows you to penetrate through the chaos in any moment or era of your life, or for that matter, the life of the world, And I don't have to tell you, we're going through a chaotic time right now. How do you deal with that? Well, people who have succeeded most as entrepreneurs really don't disrupt so much. They go through the disruption. They see the confusion that's around them and they see it as an opening. And so the Romans reinterpreted the Greek word kairos as opportunitas, which is the art of opportunity. And that comes from, the root word portas, meaning door. So chaos, the confusion in your own life, if you can reframe that as an opening rather than just a whirlpool that you're drowning in, that can make all the difference. And I found that my own ability to do that, to deal with all the changes in my body and, my work and who I was as a person, allowed me to see this as more of a gap that I could walk through rather than something I was suffering from.
So what are some ways that our audience members can create those own opportunities in their life?
One is I actually talk about, and I've done this, if you could take a piece of paper and you can talk about why your life is chaotic, and if you can actually draw the pieces that are causing you chaos as things that are sending beams or obstacles in your way, however you want to do it. And by the way, I can't draw to save my life, but I still did this. It actually allows you to kind of reframe what you're looking at, because it turns total confusion, which shuts down your brain, into something that seems more material, like actual objects on a page. Draw them where you think they belong. And that's up to you to figure out where they belong. So that can be the fact that you can't sleep at night, or you have a kid, or your work is going crazy. Take those aspects of it. Like, what is it about your work that's going crazy? Is it a terrible boss? Is it increased responsibility? Is it responsibility over others? Is it a changed economic environment or whatever? Personally, think about your relationship to your spouse. So you're not talking as well as before. Draw that on a piece of paper and then see if there's a way to navigate through that. Now, what that requires is you may need to widen the gaps. You may find that as you're drawing this stuff, your paper fills with a bunch of garbage. Now, see if there are ways that you can erase some of it and think, why am I erasing this? Or is there a way that I can sort of worm my way through? Silly as this sounds, it's really hard to describe. If you actually do it, your brain is going to be changing and you're going to start thinking that maybe there's a way to go through. You may also discover, as I did, that you can't draw.
Many of our audience members are looking for that boost of confidence in the moment, that opportunity to connect with someone, to land the deal, to create the relationship, to move towards their goal. And I think what happens for a lot of us in that key moment is we hold on to the past and tie our identity to those past failures. I wasn't confident in this situation. This person didn't like me. I didn't get the job. Take us to that moment, and what tool can we use for self-persuasion to move towards our Aristotelian soul instead of this identity tied to our own limiting beliefs?
Those limiting beliefs often come from your failures in the past. And so thinking about the future is a very kairotic thing to do, in part because one of the things you could do, if you're reframing your failures, one of the biggest causes of failures is timing. Like, you didn't do it at the right time. And you could see this in business failures throughout history. Like, brilliant idea, perfectly executed, the market wasn't ready. So the lesson you can learn from failures in the past is to think, was the timing right? And you can learn a lot about whether a market is truly ready for you. One of the things I've discovered, by the way, as I was, began doing the marketing for this book, working with my great publisher, was I suddenly discovered, and you guys, I think, probably discovered this way before I did, that there's a whole bunch of entrepreneurs and other people, mostly male, but not all, out there who call themselves Stoics.
Oh, yeah.
And so they're reviving ancient wisdom for modern reality. Well, guess what I'm doing? I mean, I'm dredging up Aristotle and Cicero and all this ancient wisdom and applying it to the day. So I may be catching a wave. A previous book I wrote, Thank You for Arguing, became a New York Times bestseller for one reason. The AP English language course that smart high schoolers take. Suddenly, the exam took on a rhetorical component, but there weren't any rhetoric textbooks that were worth reading. All of a sudden, my book comes along, Teaching Rhetoric, and I had written it for kids, suddenly became the textbook, and thousands of high schools across the land started assigning it to these poor students who had to read it over the summer. I mean, you should see the TikToks of people hating the book. But their parents then read it because the kids were, and that spread it. Now, that was totally kairotic, totally accidental. So if this book bombs, if Aristotle's Guide to Self-Persuasion, my latest book bombs, I'm going to blame it on the timing and not on me. And my soul will thank me for it.
Well, thank you for the time today. This is such a fun conversation. Where can our audience find out more about this book and the other books that you've written?
You can find it at all the fine bookstores, on Amazon, and I'm all on the usual social media places under whatever, Jay Heinrichs. Just learn to spell my name and you'll get it.
Thank you for joining us, Jay.
Such a pleasure. Love your podcast. I'm a fan.
Thank you.
Thank you.